We are counting down the 7 most disturbing birthday deaths ever recorded, celebrations meant to mark life that instead became the moment it ended. These were not planned acts of violence, but ordinary birthdays overtaken by unseen dangers, small assumptions, and decisions no one believed would matter. From quiet gatherings inside familiar homes to public celebrations that spiraled out of control, each story reveals how quickly joy can give way to catastrophe. Which birthday became the most horrifying of all? Let us begin with number 7. On May 9, 2017, Catherine Harty was 11 years old. She was visiting Drayton Manor theme park in Staffordshire, England, on a school trip. The park was familiar, controlled, and built around the assumption that danger had already been engineered out of the experience. Catherine boarded the Splash Canyon River Rapids ride with classmates. The ride followed a closed loop of moving water. Large circular rafts carried passengers through churning currents, designed to spin gently as they drifted forward. Riders were not restrained. There were no seatbelts. The expectation was balance, not force. Witnesses later described the raft rotating unevenly. At some point during the ride, Catherine stood up. Why she stood is not known. There was no panic. No emergency. No sudden mechanical failure. Just movement, water pushing, the raft turning, bodies shifting to adjust. Moments later, Catherine fell from the raft. She entered the water between the vessel and the ride's central conveyor mechanism. Before staff could intervene, she was drawn beneath the surface. The machinery continued to move. Emergency procedures were initiated. The ride was stopped. Staff entered the water. But the sequence had already completed itself. Catherine Harty was pronounced dead later that day. She was 11 years old. The park closed immediately. What had been a school outing became the focus of a national investigation. Regulators examined the ride's design, operating procedures, and risk assessments. Attention centered on what had been assumed safe, unrestrained seating, moving water, and exposed mechanical components beneath the surface. The investigation concluded that the risk of passengers standing had not been adequately addressed. There were no alarms triggered when someone stood up. No physical barriers to prevent ejection. No system designed to pause movement before the gap became lethal. In 2021, Drayton Manor theme park was fined £1 million for health and safety failings related to the ride. The Splash Canyon attraction was permanently closed. New guidance followed. Across the United Kingdom, theme park water rides were reviewed. Safety standards were revised. Risk assessments expanded to include behaviors that had previously been treated as unlikely or insignificant. For the industry, the incident became a case study. For Catherine's family, it became a dividing line. A day that began with a bus ride and a ticket wristband ended with investigations, court rulings, and a name attached to regulatory change. The ride had functioned as designed. The water had moved as intended. Nothing broke. What failed was the assumption that nothing could go wrong. A moment of standing. A shifting raft. A gap beneath the surface. And a ride meant to feel safe completed a sequence it was never meant to allow. The next death did not involve machinery. There were no moving parts. No warning signs posted. No barriers meant to separate danger from play. It happened in a place designed to feel familiar. Cameron Dallas Harris was a young man in the United States, attending a birthday party at a private residence. The setting was ordinary, friends gathered, music playing, conversations overlapping. It was the kind of celebration that relied on comfort rather than caution. A backyard. A pool. An assumption that someone was always watching. Guests moved easily between rooms and outdoors. Some stood near the pool, others sat along its edge, feet in the water. Laughter rose and fell. Phones were checked. Drinks were refilled. The rhythm of the evening never suggested urgency. At some point, Cameron entered the pool. There was no announcement. No dramatic moment. People later struggled to recall exactly when he went under because nothing about it stood out at first. In a social setting like that, movement blends into background noise. A person swimming does not trigger alarm. Minutes passed. Those nearby assumed he had surfaced elsewhere, that he had moved to another part of the yard, that he had stepped inside. No one counted time. No one tracked movement. The party continued. When someone finally noticed Cameron was no longer visible, the shift was immediate. Music stopped. Voices changed. People ran toward the pool. He was pulled from the water unresponsive. Emergency services were called. CPR was attempted by those present, then by responders when they arrived. But the window had already closed. Cameron Dallas Harris was pronounced dead by drowning. He had been surrounded by people the entire time. In the days that followed, questions surfaced, not accusations, but confusion. How could someone drown at a party? How could so many people be nearby and not see it happen? Investigators found no evidence of foul play. No indication of violence. No sign that anyone had intended harm. The death was ruled an accident. What remained was the gap between assumption and reality. In group settings, responsibility disperses. Each person believes someone else is paying attention. Each moment without visible distress reinforces the idea that nothing is wrong. The pool had not changed. The environment had not shifted. Only awareness had failed to arrive in time. Community members gathered in the aftermath. Vigils were held. Messages circulated online. Friends described Cameron as social, present, alive in the way people are remembered when absence becomes permanent. The birthday passed into memory. What remained was the quiet understanding that danger does not announce itself, and that in spaces designed for leisure, silence can be mistaken for safety. The party ended. The assumption did not. The next birthday did not end with silence. It ended with a gunshot. On October 20th, 2007, in Ohio, a family gathered in their home for a birthday. There were no crowds. No music spilling into the street. No decorations meant to impress anyone outside the house. It was a private moment, shaped by routine and familiarity. Daniel Petrick was 16 years old. His birthday had come and gone, but the expectation tied to it remained. A gift. Access. Permission. He wanted to play Halo 3, a video game he had been prohibited from using after previous concerns about its effect on his behavior. His parents, Mark and Susan Petrick, said no. The refusal was not dramatic. There was no argument that escalated in the moment. The decision was firm, but ordinary, the kind parents make every day, believing boundaries will hold. Daniel left the room. He returned carrying a handgun taken from his father's bedroom. The weapon had been stored at home, assumed secure, assumed separate from impulse. Daniel raised it and fired. The shot struck his mother, Susan, in the head. His father, Mark, was also shot and critically wounded but survived. The house fell into shock. Emergency services were called. Neighbors arrived. Daniel placed the gun down without resistance. When asked what he had done, he reportedly said he was checking to see if his parents were dead. There was no attempt to flee. No attempt to hide the act. No visible emotion. The birthday dispute had ended in seconds. In court, the case drew national attention. Prosecutors described a calculated act. The defense pointed to immaturity, injury, and influence. The trial unfolded under intense scrutiny, not just for the crime itself, but for what it represented. A boundary enforced. A gift withheld. A response that crossed into irreversibility. Daniel Petrick was convicted of aggravated murder and attempted aggravated murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Mark Petrick survived. Susan Petrick did not. The birthday did not matter anymore. The game did not matter anymore. What remained was a moment when frustration met access, and the assumption that a household boundary could not become fatal was proven wrong. In this story, there was no accident. No environmental hazard. No system misfiring under pressure. There was intent. But the pattern was the same. A celebration meant to affirm life. A moment of denial. An outcome no one expected to follow. The house was quiet again afterward. Not because the conflict had resolved, but because nothing else could be said. The next birthday did not involve a crowd. There was no venue. No ride. No public celebration unfolding in stages. It happened inside a house. On the evening of June 26, 2022, Sophie Bennett, 23 years old, was at a residence on Dulwich Road in Kingstanding, Birmingham. The gathering was small. Familiar. A birthday marked in the way many are, at home, among people who knew one another, with no expectation that anything out of the ordinary would occur. Fireworks had been brought to the house. They were not unusual. Consumer grade. The kind sold legally across the United Kingdom, often treated as decorations rather than explosives. They were meant to add noise, slight, a brief sense of occasion. Something memorable. Something temporary. What was not visible was the condition of the house itself. Investigators would later determine that gas had been leaking inside the property. How long it had been present was unclear. There was no immediate alarm. No smell that triggered evacuation. No moment where danger announced itself plainly. The environment felt stable. At some point during the celebration, fireworks were ignited near the house. The ignition was instantaneous. The reaction was not. Gas that had accumulated within the structure found its trigger. The pressure released in a single, violent event. The house exploded outward, collapsing parts of the structure and sending debris into the surrounding street. Neighbors described a sound unlike fireworks. Louder. Deeper. Final. Emergency services arrived within minutes. Fire crews worked to secure the site as residents were evacuated from nearby homes. Smoke filled the street. The house, moments earlier an ordinary setting for a birthday, was unrecognizable. Sophie Bennett was pulled from the wreckage with catastrophic injuries. She died later as a result of those injuries. The celebration ended in seconds. In the aftermath, investigators focused on the sequence rather than intent. Fireworks were identified as the ignition source. A suspected gas leak provided the fuel. Neither alone was enough to explain what happened. Together, they were. The case drew national attention. Media coverage focused on the speed of the explosion and the fact that the fireworks involved were legal, commonly used, and not designed for destruction. Safety officials reiterated warnings about using fireworks near buildings and the dangers of undetected gas leaks in domestic spaces. The house was destroyed. The street was cordoned off. The birthday passed into record. No charges were brought against Sophie. No suggestion was made that harm was intended. The event was ruled a tragic accident, one defined by timing, environment, and a spark that was never meant to ignite anything beyond the night sky. In this story, there was no argument. No denial. No confrontation. Just assumption. That a house was safe. That a celebration was contained. That a moment of ignition would remain small. The spark lasted an instant. The damage did not. The next birthday did not end at home. It did not involve a single moment or a single decision. It unfolded over miles. On October 6, 2018, Amy here was 34 years old. She was traveling with friends in upstate New York, heading to a birthday celebration. The plan was simple. A day trip. A winery visit. Time together before the night continued elsewhere. To get there, they hired a stretch limousine. The vehicle was long, heavy, and familiar in shape, the kind used for celebrations meant to feel special and removed from ordinary travel. Inside, passengers talked, laughed, and settled into the assumption that the ride itself was the safest part of the day. Outside, the route descended toward Schoharie. The limousine approached an intersection at the bottom of a hill. A stop sign waited ahead. What happened next did not announce itself inside the cabin. The vehicle did not slow. Investigators later determined the limousine's brakes had failed. The driver had no effective way to stop. The vehicle continued downhill, crossed the intersection at speed, and crashed into a parked car before striking pedestrians nearby. The impact was catastrophic. All 18 people inside the limousine were killed instantly, including Amy here. 2 pedestrians were also killed. The driver did not survive. The birthday celebration was never reached. Emergency responders arrived to a scene defined by stillness rather than chaos. The road was closed. The vehicles were destroyed. Personal belongings were scattered across a space never meant to hold them. In the days that followed, attention shifted from the celebration to the system that carried it. Investigations revealed extensive safety failures. The limousine had been operating despite known mechanical issues. Inspections had been missed. Regulations designed to prevent exactly this outcome had not been enforced. The ride had not failed suddenly. It had been failing for some time. Amy here had not made a risky choice. She had not ignored warnings. She had not been involved in any action beyond getting into a vehicle she was told was safe. The birthday was incidental. What mattered was momentum, a heavy vehicle moving downhill with nothing left to stop it. The crash became one of the deadliest transportation accidents in modern US history. Laws were reviewed. Oversight was questioned. Families were left with answers that arrived only after loss. A celebration planned in advance ended before it began. The ride continued only until gravity finished the sequence. The next birthday did not happen in public. There were no rides. No crowd spilling into the street. No movement meant to impress anyone beyond the room. It took place inside a house. In February 2024, Michael Wright was in Toronto, Ontario, celebrating his birthday at a residential property. He was 41 years old. The gathering was small and familiar, the kind of night built around conversation, food, and the quiet comfort of being indoors while winter pressed against the city outside. Candles were lit. They were not unusual. A cake on a table. Warm light reflecting off walls already dimmed by evening. Nothing about the moment suggested danger. Fire, in that context, felt controlled, contained within wax and wick, expected to be extinguished once the celebration passed. At some point, the night shifted. Exactly how the fire began was less important than how quickly it took hold. Flames spread inside the residence, moving through spaces that had felt stable minutes earlier. Smoke filled rooms. Heat rose. Visibility collapsed. People attempted to escape. Emergency services were called. Fire crews arrived to a structure already burning from within. Neighbors watched from outside as crews worked to contain the blaze and search the interior. Michael Wright did not make it out. He was pronounced dead as a result of the fire. By morning, the house was damaged beyond recognition. What had been a place of gathering was reduced to debris, ash, and the lingering smell of smoke. The birthday ended not with cleanup, but with investigators moving through the remains, documenting what was left. In the days that followed, the community responded. Vigils were held. Messages appeared online. Friends and neighbors shared memories of Michael, not focused on how he died, but on who he had been, present, familiar, part of the rhythm of everyday life in the neighborhood. Safety officials reiterated reminders that surface every winter, the risks of open flames indoors, the speed at which residential fires can spread, the narrow window between control and collapse. Nothing suggested recklessness. Nothing suggested intent. Just a moment meant to mark another year intersecting with an element that does not pause once it escapes containment. A cake was lit. A room warmed. A house filled with people. And when the flames moved beyond what anyone expected, there was no way to return the night to how it had begun. The candles burned longer than planned. This last birthday did not end with noise. There was no collapse. No flames. No sudden moment that drew attention. It unfolded quietly, inside a home. In the United Kingdom, a woman in her 20s, known to family as Katie, was celebrating her birthday indoors. The gathering was modest. A small number of people. Familiar rooms. The kind of evening shaped by conversation rather than ceremony. It was cold outside. Heating had been running for hours, sealing the house against the night. Windows were closed. Doors stayed shut. Nothing about the environment felt dangerous. The warmth felt earned. At some point during the evening, guests noticed she looked tired. It wasn't alarming. People brushed it off as exhaustion. Birthday days are long. Social energy fades. She sat down. She rested. No one rushed to intervene because nothing appeared urgent. Carbon monoxide does not announce itself. It has no smell. No color. No irritation to warn the body that something is wrong. As it accumulated inside the house, the air remained unchanged to anyone watching. Conversations continued. Time passed normally. The celebration wound down the way most do, slowly, without a clear ending. Later, she was found unresponsive. Emergency services were called. Paramedics entered the property and immediately recognized the signs. Readings confirmed elevated carbon monoxide levels inside the home. By then, the exposure had already done its work. She was pronounced dead. Investigators traced the source to a fault in the home's heating system. A malfunction that had not triggered an alarm. A failure that had gone unnoticed because nothing about the space felt unsafe. The birthday had not caused the danger. The gathering had not escalated risk. The house itself had become the hazard. In the aftermath, officials emphasized what often comes only after loss, the importance of carbon monoxide detectors, routine maintenance, and the reality that danger does not always arrive violently. Vigils followed. Messages appeared online. Friends remembered her not for how she died, but for the ordinariness of the night before, how nothing had seemed wrong. The celebration ended without disruption. The consequence did not. In this story, there was no single decision to point to. No moment to rewind. No visible warning that could have changed the outcome once the exposure began. The air remained invisible. The danger remained silent. And a birthday meant to pass quietly did exactly that, until it didn't. Those were 7 birthdays meant to celebrate life, each overtaken by moments no one saw coming. Different places. Different people. Different circumstances. But the same fragile truth, joy does not protect us from consequence. These were not stories of intent, but of assumption. Of moments believed to be safe, until they weren't. Some ended in silence. Others in chaos. All of them in loss. And long after the candles burned out, these birthdays were remembered for something else entirely.